Okay, in today's lessons, we're going to be talking about complex numbers. When working with complex numbers, we need to understand imaginary numbers. Okay, imaginary numbers are I equals square root of negative 1. And we have dealt with that when simplifying radicals, when you have a negative under the radical. And a new concept is I squared equals negative 1. And here it's important to remember that I is not a variable, it is a symbol for a specific number. Kind of relate to it where you say pi. Pi is a specific number, specific value. Same thing goes for I. It's not a variable, and it doesn't change. Okay, now let's look at simplifying some expressions. So this should be a review for you. So if I have the square root of negative 81, remember we need to factor out that negative 1. So we factor this down to negative 1 times 81, and then factor that again to the square root of negative 1 times square root of positive 81, and then we know by definition the square root of negative 1 is I, square root of 81 is 9, and then we just rewrite that as 9I. We always put the numbers in front of the I, just like we always put the numbers in front of the variables. We do the same thing here. Another example would be the square root of negative 48. Again, we break this down to the square root of negative 1 times 48. Break it down to the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 48. Square root of negative 1 is I. I can break 48 into 16 times 3. 16 is the largest perfect square. That is a factor of 48. I break that down to the square root of 16 times the square root of 3, and I get 4I radical 3. Okay, let's look at the definition of a complex number. Okay, definition of complex number is any number written in this form a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers and I is an imaginary unit, and b cannot equal 0. So it's going to look like a plus bi. You could have a plus a negative bi or a minus bi, either one. The real numbers are a and b, and the imaginary part would be the I. So let's look at what happens when we want to add and subtract complex numbers. Okay, when we add and subtract complex numbers, we're going to combine like terms, just like we do when we're doing regular addition of polynomials. Look for the same variables, you add them together, you look for constants and add them together. So let's look at the example, quantity 8 minus 3i plus quantity 2 plus 5i. So you locate your like terms. So I see that I have 8 and 2 are like terms. I combine them, and then I combine my I terms, negative 3 plus 5i, and I simplify. And I get 8 plus 2 is 10, and negative 3i plus 5i is 2i. And my final answer is 10 plus 2i. Let's look at another example. So here I have the quantity 8 plus 7i plus quantity negative 12 plus 11i. Combine my like terms. I have 8 plus negative 12, and then I combine 7i and 11i, and I simplify. Another example. This one is a little bit different. Well, here I have the negative sign, so I'm going to need to make sure that you distribute it to the 12, and you distribute it to the 2i when you combine your like terms. So I have 9 minus 12 plus negative 6 minus 2i. Combine those like terms, and I have negative 3 minus i. Okay, when we multiply complex numbers, you're going to use the same techniques as when multiplying polynomials. That's FOIL or distributive property. It's going to be very similar to what we did recently with multiplying radicals, but the math is not as tricky as with the multiplication of radicals. So, and here, this is where we're going to have to remember that I squared is negative 1, and you need to substitute this value into the equations and simplify. Anytime you get an I squared, you need to put in negative 1 for that. So let's look at an example. Here I have 8 plus 5i times the quantity 2 minus 3i. So we just FOIL, multiply the first two terms, so I have 8 times 2, that gives me 16. Multiply the outer, 8 times negative 3i gives me negative 24i. Multiply my inner terms, I have 5i times 2 gives me a positive 10i. And then 5 times negative 3i, that gives me minus 15i squared. So now just combine my like terms. So I have the negative 24i and 10i combined to give me 14i, and I have the minus 15i squared. So now I know I see this I squared, So I need to substitute negative 1 in for that and simplify. So now I want it with 16 minus 14i plus 15, and simplify and get 31 minus 14i. And that's my answer. Okay. Let's look at another example here. I have quantities negative 6 plus 2i times 5 minus 3i. So I'm going to go through the FOIL, so I need to multiply the first two terms. So negative 6 plus 5 gives me 30. Negative 6 times negative 3i gives me positive 18i. Positive 2i times 5 gives me 10i. Positive 2 times negative 3i gives me negative 6i squared. Next thing to do is combine my like terms and substitute in my negative 1. So my like terms here are 18i, and 10i gives me 28i. I have a negative 6i squared. I substitute negative 1 in there, and I get a positive 6. So my answer is negative 24 plus 28. Combine my negative 30 and 6, I get negative 24 and 28i. Okay. Make sure you complete the completion form shown under this video on the website. Bring your notes along with any questions you have to class tomorrow. See ya.